I'm Laura Makin-Isherwood in London, and these are the top headlines of the day. Russia says negotiations with officials from Kiev to resolve the conflict in Ukraine are making headway, and claim Moscow's troops were not working to topple the Ukrainian government. Russia and Ukraine agreed to a day-long ceasefire around a series of evacuation corridors to allow civilians to escape the fighting. Britain unveils new aviation sanctions which give power to detain any Russian aircraft and ban exports of aviation or space-related goods to Russia, saying it had already impounded one plane. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's no longer pressing for NATO membership for Ukraine, which was one of Russia's stated reasons for invasion. The United States rejects a surprise offer by NATO ally Poland to transfer its Russian-made fighter jets to a US base in Germany as a way to replenish Ukraine's air force. Oil prices rise towards $130 a barrel, supported by concern of a potential supply shock as the United States bans Russian oil imports and amid signs that some buyers are already steering clear. Ukraine has taken a step back from its NATO membership aspirations. According to latest reports, Volodymyr Zelensky is no longer pressing for NATO membership for Ukraine. In a move that appears to be aimed at placating Moscow, Zelensky also said that he is open to compromise on the status of two breakaway pro-Russian territories in the Donbas region. Russia's President Vladimir Putin recognized these two regions as independent just days before the invasion. Referring to NATO membership, President Zelensky admitted that he had cooled his expectations when it became apparent that NATO was not prepared to accept Ukraine. He said that the military alliance was afraid of confrontation with Russia. Zelensky also said that he does not want to be president of a country that is begging for something on its knees. Russia has made it clear that it does not want Ukraine to join NATO. In recent years, NATO has only expanded further east, infuriating the Kremlin. Russia views NATO's enlargement as a threat and wants NATO to withdraw from Eastern Europe. On the issue of Donetsk and Lugansk, Putin recognized them as independent as two separatist pro-Russian republics in eastern Ukraine. Zelensky acknowledged these demands, saying that he was ready to discuss and find a compromise on how these regions will live on, but also pointed out that the two areas have not been recognized by anyone apart from Russia. President Zelensky noted that instead of giving ultimatums, President Putin should start a dialogue to try to find a solution to the ongoing war. Our correspondent Ollie Barrett has sent us this update from Riga, Latvia.
Well, I think there will be further questions for the President of Ukraine in the coming days about the exact nature of those statements, exactly what he means, exactly how far he is prepared to go, and all of that will feed into further diplomacy. Of course, we have had confirmation from the Russians today that they do expect the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to hold talks with his Ukrainian counterpart in Turkey on Thursday. That is an offer that was made by Turkish officials earlier in the week, and Moscow now appears to be saying that those talks will indeed take place. And if they do, those will be the highest level talks that we've seen between Russia and Ukraine since the conflict began. If those talks do take place, they will be likely, I'm sure, to touch on some of the issues that President Zelensky has been raising, because, as you quite rightly say, Russia has all the way through this crisis and before it been very clear that Ukraine's ambition of NATO membership was a major issue for it. The Kremlin has also been clear, heading into those talks between delegations in Belarus between Russia and Ukraine, that it wants Ukraine to recognize those breakaway regions in the east of Ukraine as independent. And that was one of the conditions that the Kremlin has been setting out. So, as I say, as we expect to head into more diplomacy in the coming days, I'm sure that the comments that President Zelensky has been making to US media and in other arenas in recent days, in the last 24 hours or so, will be a focus of those talks.
Well, it's been 2 weeks since the start of the invasion, and Russian forces have encircled several key cities in Ukraine. As evacuations of cities continue, refugees pour into Europe. You can see that Russia has made advancements mainly from the north, east and south, and targets from all over the country have been attacked from the land, sea and air. But the Ukrainian military says that the Russian advance has been slowed and Russian troops are demoralised. In the north, the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, remains under Ukrainian control, but remains under an ever-increasing risk of being surrounded. Towns on the outskirts of the capital, like Bucha and Irpin, have been under heavy Russian shelling this past week, and a huge Russian military convoy remains parked outside the city. The city of Sumy has seen heavy fighting in recent days, and civilians were finally evacuated through a humanitarian corridor on Tuesday after 21 people, including 2 children, were killed overnight. In the east, Kharkiv continues to remain out of Russia's hands despite its best efforts. The city, once a cultural and educational hub, has been under constant bombardment since the invasion began. In the south, Russia's latest target is the strategic southern city of Mariupol, and attempts to evacuate an estimated 200,000 civilians from the city have so far failed. Taking that city would allow Russia to link forces from the annexed Crimean Peninsula with their other forces from the east. The famed port city of Odessa also remains under Ukrainian control and has so far been spared from fighting, but Ukraine has warned that Russia plans to bomb the city. This comes after Russian forces last week took the port city of Kherson, just north of Crimea, and heavy fighting continues for the city of Mykolaiv. The west of the centre of the country have so far been spared from fighting. The main western city of Lviv has become the epicentre for foreign diplomatic missions, journalists and Ukrainians fleeing from the east. The only violence in the region was reported in the central city of Vinnytsia, whose civilian airport was destroyed by Russian airstrikes. Russia and Ukraine have agreed on a day-long ceasefire along humanitarian corridors today in order to allow civilians in Kiev and 4 other Ukrainian cities safe passage. This is the 3rd day that Russia has proposed such humanitarian corridors, despite previous attempts being hampered by Russian shelling. Ukraine will try to evacuate civilians through 6 humanitarian corridors. Residents in cities on the outskirts of Kiev will also be evacuated to the capital. 55 children and staff from an orphanage located in the city of Vorzel will also be taken to safety. This comes after 5,000 civilians were evacuated from Sumy on Tuesday. A humanitarian corridor was set up connecting Sumy and the city of Poltava. The first evacuation used 22 buses and contained over 1,100 foreign students that will travel towards Lviv by train. Sumy, which is located in the northeastern part of Ukraine, has been under heavy Russian fire for the past week. Evacuations also took place outside the capital Kiev, but attempts to evacuate around 200,000 civilians from the port town of Mariupol failed on several occasions, with both Kiev and Moscow blaming each other for the failures. Our correspondent Anis Malik has sent us the latest from Kiev.
Well, today there's a relative calm. We see more and more cars out on the road. The traffic signals are functioning. But with that, we're seeing more and more military deployments as well on the road. It's roughly 8:30 a.m. here in Kiev, in the capital of Ukraine. Last night, it did not snow much, but despite of that grimness, that tension remains in the air. Just a while back, about an hour and a half back, we saw that air raid alert coming in from the city administration that had advised to the citizens to take to the bomb shelters and stay safe until they issue further instructions. So that goes on to explain the magnitude of the situation. Now, as I talk to you, there's a lot of grimness and tensions in the air. A lot of people have been migrating. The railway station is currently full, and people only who have chosen to stay back are those who are either volunteers or who are here in the city of Kiev by choice. Well, the Zelensky government response has been a mixed response by and large. They say that they take it with a pinch of salt because they are not very hopeful with regards to the ceasefire, given that the shelling has been continuing intermittently. Now, onto the humanitarian crisis, more than 2 million refugees have fled the country. The country that's almost 50% of the population. About the population over here in Ukraine is estimated at about 44.13 million as per the census that was done in 2020. And as per UN estimates, more than 2 million people have left. So that actually goes on to show that about a greater deal of the population has actually left the country, and this will further escalate the crisis. Lots and lots of women and children are those among those who are allowed to go. Then we're seeing the elderly as well, those who are among them. So the humanitarian crisis is existent. A lot of people are looking at these humanitarian corridors as a window of opportunity to flee to safety.
The United States says it's working with Ukraine to prevent Russia from seizing control of biological research material in the country, amid concerns that such items might be used to create bioweapons. This statement comes after Russia accused the US of funding biolabs in Ukraine and spending millions to create bioweapons. Senior State Department official Victoria Nuland was directly asked by US lawmakers if Ukraine had any bioweapons, to which she replied that Ukraine has biological research facilities and that the US was concerned that Russian forces want to gain control of them. Nuland further says the US is working with Kiev on how to prevent this from happening. Russia claims there are around 30 labs with incriminating documents which allegedly expose America's operation to develop bioweapons, including the plague and anthrax. Russia also said no evidence of stockpiles were found, alleging Ukraine destroyed the entire stock last month. The Atlantic Council, a think tank in Washington, had said that Moscow was just seeking to justify its invasion by pushing a false narrative that Ukraine was developing dirty bombs and biological weapons. No evidence supporting any of these claims have yet been found. Kharkiv has seen some of the heaviest fighting since the war began. Ukrainian regional police say 170 civilians had been killed across Kharkiv, including 5 children, and the children left injured are struggling between life and death. This is the story of an 8-year-old boy in Kharkiv who's currently being cared for at a paediatric neurosurgery centre.
Dima Kasyanov is an 8-year-old boy from the embattled city of Kharkiv in Ukraine. He's unconscious and in a pediatric neurosurgery center. His father, Sergei Kasyanov, showed Reuters his son's X-ray.
This is shrapnel. It entered via jaw and lodged itself at the base of the skull.
The child's mother silently wept.
We were all at home. The shell hit the apartment and exploded inside, setting 2 parts of the building on fire. We grabbed a few things, documents, and just like we were in pajamas, we escaped. My mother suffered as well. She is in intensive care. She has broken ribs and damage to her spine. The doctors treated it. But the child, he suffered the worst injury.
Kharkiv has seen some of the heaviest fighting since Russian troops invaded Ukraine on February 24th. The Ukrainian regional police official said on Tuesday that 170 civilians had been killed across the Kharkiv region since the war began, including 5 children. Russia denies targeting civilians and said its forces are engaged in a, quote, special military operation. None of that makes sense to Dima's father.
All there is in our part of town are some private businesses and 2 hospitals nearby. No military warehouses, military establishments, units, nothing. Just some orchards, summer houses.
This hospital treats the youngest and most defenseless victims of the fighting. A doctor leans over to ask a child, who he calls Little Vova, how he's doing. I'm fine, he replies faintly. Medics said he was hit in the head by a bullet during fighting in the first few days of Russia's attack on Ukraine, one of several children brought into the hospital to be treated for shrapnel and bullet wounds. Alexander Dikhnovsky, the doctor who heads the center, said the unit had operated on 4 children with war wounds so far.
Sadly, 1 little girl died yesterday. She was admitted on the first night of the aggression and invasion of our country.
In the surgery theater, a Reuters reporter heard the rumble of a distant explosion. One of the nurses explained that was just part of the job now.
Leaders of US spy agencies say that Russian President Vladimir Putin may intensify the assault on Ukraine despite military setbacks and economic hardships. They have warned that there are an ugly few weeks ahead.
Russia's failure to rapidly seize Kiev and overwhelm Ukrainian forces has deprived Moscow of the quick military victory that it probably had originally expected would prevent the United States and NATO from being able to provide meaningful military aid to Ukraine. Moreover, we assess Moscow underestimated the strength of Ukraine's resistance and the degree of internal military challenges we are observing, which include an ill-constructed plan, morale issues, and considerable logistical issues.
And where that leads, I think, is for an ugly next few weeks, in which he doubles down, as I said before, with scant regard for civilian casualties, in which urban fighting can get even uglier. Because the one thing I'm absolutely convinced of, and I think our analysts across the intelligence community are absolutely convinced of, is the Ukrainians are going to continue to resist fiercely and effectively.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine has been going on for 14 days now. The US intelligence agency says 2,000 to 4,000 Russian troops have died during the invasion. Russia has faced a number of hard-hitting sanctions during this period, which has isolated the country like never before. US intel says that Russia has started to feel the effects of sanctions. They have also warned of an elevated nuclear threat. The Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency has pointed out that under Putin's presidency, Russia has been working overtime to modernize its weaponry, particularly smaller-yield nuclear weapons. Last month, Putin had put Russia's nuclear forces on high alert, a move that alarmed the West.
The 2022 annual threat assessment highlights some of these connections. The assessment focuses next on a number of key global and transnational.
China's President Xi Jinping has called for maximum restraint in Ukraine. He also said that he was pained to see the flames of war reignited in Europe. This is by far his strongest statement to the date on the conflict. It comes after China abstained from a Security Council vote that condemned Russian aggression against Ukraine. More details in our next report.
Chinese President Xi Jinping came out with his strongest statement yet regarding Russia's invasion of Ukraine, calling for maximum restraint and saying he is, quote, pained to see the flames of war reignited in Europe, Chinese state media reported Tuesday. Xi spoke at a virtual meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and, according to China's CCTV, said the three countries should jointly support peace talks between Russia and Ukraine to prevent the conflict from, quote, spinning out of control. Macron in the meeting reminded Xi of the role that China must play as a member of the UN Security Council. China has refused to condemn Russia's actions outright and last month abstained from a Security Council vote seeking to condemn Russia's aggression against Ukraine and demand it withdraw its forces. China has also referred to Western sanctions against Russia as illegal, and in the meeting, Xi expressed concern over the impact sanctions may have on the stability of global finance, energy supplies, transportation, and supply chains. The friendship between China and Russia strengthened last month when Russian President Vladimir Putin attended the opening ceremony of the Beijing Winter Olympics on the same day that the two countries declared a no-limits strategic partnership. But that relationship has become awkward for China as the war in Ukraine escalates. CIA Director William Burns told the House Intelligence Committee on Tuesday that he thinks Xi and others among China's leadership are unsettled by what they're seeing in Ukraine.
They did not anticipate the significant difficulties the Russians were going to run into. I think they're unsettled by the reputational damage that can come by their close association with President Putin's. I think they're a little bit unsettled about the impact on the global economy. And third, I think they're a little bit unsettled by the way in which Vladimir Putin has driven Europeans and Americans much closer together.
Meanwhile, Macron's office said in a statement that she expressed support for French-German efforts to reach a ceasefire. And a German government spokesman said the three leaders agreed that their foreign ministers would coordinate further efforts to end the conflict.
The Russia-Ukraine war has taken over social media, and the unfolding conflict has revealed the real power of big tech at this crucial time. We leave you with this report. Thanks for watching.
When I posted this first video at the beginning, not even at the beginning, but a couple hours later, it had like 20,000 views, which was really insane amount. And when it reached like 20 million views, I was like, that is the half of my country's population.
Because a majority of Russians don't believe what is going on in Ukraine. I don't know what can be worse than the war in your country while you are here and you're observing how places where you were hanging out with your friends are now destroyed.
This is right, Arab.